Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
In just the next couple of minutes, we're going to give you the answers to your life. I know that's a bold claim, but I've seen it. I've learned it thanks to Dan Clark. He is an amazing, amazing life coach. And a lot of it starts in your childhood, and that's what we're going to dig into today. And his website, by the way, is transformedlife.net. Dan, great to have you back. How you doing?
Oh, it's great to be here. Great to be here.
Yeah, so we've talked about this before. We've skimmed upon it a few times, but now we're going to go into more depth because it's so powerful and insightful for a lot of us that our lives were formed. The way we are now began between the ages of 0 and 7, right?
Great memory. Absolutely true. And by the time we're 4 years old, so many things are set in place that we believe these things that are true. And we call that self-fulfilling prophecy. As an adult, particularly after 30, what we believe always comes true in our life.
Interesting. So what you're saying is whatever you learned, I'm going to break it down to the basics. Whatever you learned around 4 years old, let's say now you get to 30, you believe those things, and now you're going to make them come true because it's your belief system.
Correct. It's integrated into the 4-year-old brain. But here's the important part, and the most part that most people believe, is that they don't know that those belief systems are there. They only recognize them when a problem shows up.
But when a problem shows up, they don't necessarily know it came from their 4-year-old brain.
Correct. 0 to 4 or 0 to 7. Correct. Right. And so that's why it's really difficult to try to help someone see how this works when we start thinking about it. But when you break it down, like I was working with a couple yesterday, a brand new couple, and we were talking about how her husband was like her dad. And she's like, there's no way he's like her dad. Well, in about 10 minutes, I had broken that down where she's in tears sobbing because her dad never talked and her husband doesn't talk, doesn't respond. And she hadn't put those two together. And so she's a talker. And so the relationship has always been in this place like, well, I just don't need to talk. Well, there is a potential of not wanting to talk in a relationship, but again, that's mostly learned. There's really no reason why we don't want to talk. That's just learned. And this process is understanding that how we are, again, is the experiences that we have, and they integrate them. And that's just who we believe that we are. And that creates the self-fulfilling prophecy, which means if I believe, let me stop for just a moment and talk about something about relationships. We always marry someone based on the first 4 years of brain development. Divorces happen in 3, by the way. By the time we're married the third time, we work most of it out. So that's why there's usually 3 marriages in a relationship once we get divorced. But the first one is almost always related to, is always related to the first 4 years of brain development. That's because you can't like something you haven't liked before. And your unconscious, which is 95% of you, chooses what you think about before you think about it.
Now, I'm going to try and translate that to the relationship. For example, the first marriage. I'm having trouble processing that. I'm trying to put that together, how that goes. Give us some more.
Well, it's really not hard. Your energy exchange with them makes you feel like they are familiar to you, and you think you like them because of what you see or what they do. But really, the 95% of you says, oh, this is very familiar to something back there, so you're going to like it. But because in relationships, we put our best foot forward, then that means that person at some point isn't really being authentic. And if you really think about the basics, the first 2 years of the relationship create the communication code. It's usually not very accurate. Relationships last 7 years. Most divorces happen between year 7 and 8 because you can only do something that's unpleasant or hold on to something for 5 years. You only survive something for 5 years. After 5 years, we're done, right? So that's 7 years. So it's kind of how this works. If you think about the logic of it, 2 years of developing a communication code based on what I think I have, and then I can only tolerate something negative for 5 years, relationship breaks down in 7. And you can almost put a thumbtack on the wall, on a calendar rather, 7 years, 15 years. It's really fascinating. So this self-fulfilling prophecy is that I'm going to marry someone similar to the difficulties that my mom and dad had.
Yeah. And by the way, the 7, why do they call it the 7-year itch?
Yeah, it's amazing. We are actually more methodical. We are more in systems than we ever believed before. And when we believe something to be true so powerfully, like I believe that I should stay in this relationship because it's just what I should do, my belief system doesn't let me move away from something that's not working for me because I attribute my current relationship based on what I believe that I experienced with my early development stage. That's why marriages either fall apart quickly or they don't. That's why divorces follow families, and also all kinds of things follow families.
This is so fascinating, so interesting, and because it's so important. It is our lives, and a lot of people don't realize where it began. And I try to, connect the dots in my life. And friends, had a friend last night, was talking to him, and we know somebody mutually. I know her well, and she's with somebody, and she has a habit of just going flying off on the handle, just like yelling. But what happened when she was younger? She was abused by her father. And I believe in that. And as he's explaining it to me, she's going back to something that's comfortable for her. It feels good for her just to do that because that's her comfortable spot. But, maybe her spouse, he's not confrontational. So he walks away. He doesn't want to deal with it. And then you have the conflict and it just keeps going around and around.
When you think about a person who's been abused, that brain actually, or when they've been harmed in some way, it's called an abused brain. And what that means is that if you have a bruise and you touch it, it's going to hurt, right? And you don't have emotional regulation when you have abuse when you're growing up. And that's why we call it good and bad anger. You don't have regulation at all when you have an abused brain because your brain goes to that, I don't ever want to experience this again. But again, that's so fast that you don't really notice it. Maybe you're familiar with the term PTSD, but now they've been talking about childhood PTSD.
Wow.
Which is foreign PTSD. And I work specifically with that. That's probably the most powerful thing that I work with young women or women who are under 30 because they really have such difficulties in what they experienced while they were young. I mean, women just take all types of abuse in our current culture. It's just super, super sad.
Absolutely. And it just in general, you don't know what you went through. Like you said, your subconscious takes over. So there could have been things, it could go back. Correct me if I'm wrong. If somebody were to say to you, or you hear when you were a child, let's say you're 3, somebody says a certain word, has nothing to do with you, has nothing to do with your situation, but you remember that word and it shaped you.
Well, absolutely. Because again, we don't know in a child's life what's going to affect them until they're an adult, and how they process it is super important. That's why when I work with parents, I always teach them to let that child express what they're thinking and what they're experiencing, even to the point that they hate or don't like you as a mom or a dad, because that's beautiful. But at the end of that, they still have to follow the rules. But a child who doesn't get the opportunity to release the energy that's inside them, they hold on to it. Remember, an unexpressed emotion never goes away, even from childhood. So that explosive anger that you see in this young lady is basically she's been unable to express the pain that's on the inside of her. And that can be, well, it doesn't really matter what it is, but that can be very difficult because she doesn't know how to manage that because no one showed her how. It's kind of like a stick of TNT. You touch it, it's off and running, and that's that PTSD stuff.
What do you do in that situation? Let's say you're dealing with relationship issues or you're just having challenges in your life. How do you connect back to your childhood to figure out what's going on?
There's a ton of different ways to do that. One of the best ways, however, and I really love this idea, I do this quite a bit, is to be thinking about what your belief systems are. Now, there's 3 things that are important here in belief systems: what we believe, our attitude, and our perceptions, right? Now, your perception and your attitude is based on the past experiences. Like if you had a bad experience with a Chevy, you're not going to like Chevy cars at all, right? That's just a belief system, but there's nothing wrong with one car value over another. They're all about the same. So our perception is always based on past experiences. So when you start thinking about quietly writing down what you believe and the attitudes you have toward things, just go backwards and look at your family system, look at what you experienced, what mom and dad taught you, even your brothers and sisters, and just look at them. And you can begin to take apart what you actually experienced and see how it influenced who you are. But here's the downside. This is the most difficult part. You cannot see yourself. No matter how hard you try that, you cannot see your own issues. Someone must point them out to you. That's because they're so familiar. They're automatic. They're integrated. You have to have someone reflect it back to you.
Wow. It's almost like it's right there in front of your face and you didn't even see it because it's so in your face.
Right. I can't tell you how many times someone will say to me, I didn't see it that way. That's because you help them reframe what's actually happening. It's not hard. Quality friends will help you with that. Here's another interesting thing about perception, beliefs, and attitudes is that our imagination is so powerful. The reason that we don't engage, the reason that the self-fulfilling prophecy is so important is because the reason that we don't engage in people is because we have so many imaginations about what will happen, the unknown. Someone who's living fully in the present is not afraid of the unknown. Someone who's fully self-aware understands that they're not afraid of the unknown because they know no matter what happens, they will be able to handle it. Most people are afraid that they can't handle the unknown. And so instead of being present, they're trying to figure out how they can manage what's happening in the moment. It's kind of like a bird, right? A birds are just like in the moment. If we can learn to let go of holding on to the things that we don't want, and being present and trusting that we can handle no matter what happens, that we have the strength to do that, that is a powerful transition.
Very difficult thing to do, I would imagine. How does somebody do that? Where do they start?
Well, they start by, again, imagining what they want their life to be like. Because here's a powerful part. If, like, for example, I had some negative interaction with my life last weekend, and I was recognizing I have some judgments toward a particular person. And we're still on this path and you're always growing. And I recognized that my attitude and irritation toward them was about my judgment toward them. So this week I've been spending time meditating specifically on releasing that judgment, letting go of it, pulling toward me the joy and the love and the care I have for them, and releasing my judgment. I am predicting in advance how I want to be with them. See, if I pull toward me how I want to be, then when I start thinking about that, when I think about them, the unpleasant emotions I have toward them show up and I release it. I'm just sitting on my chair at home, right? Eyes closed, music playing. I'm thinking about what I don't like about them. And then I pull toward them how I want to feel toward them. I'm releasing the old energy and pulling new energy to me. Most people don't know that they can create tomorrow by creating today. Now, here's a fascinating fact that works. You actually predict tomorrow by the energy that you have inside you today. That's why if you release all of the old energy or emotions from the past, you actually create tomorrow, because tomorrow is created by the energy inside you today.
Wow. So, okay. What if you're feeling really tired and just like down? Does that mean that tomorrow's going to be?
No, it's called a baseline energy. Baseline energy is like shame or guilt or anger or bitterness, right? No, so it's not about having good or bad days. Let's have those days. Those are just typical flowing of energy. But our baseline is what our belief system is, like what we really believe. Like, that shouldn't be that way. We're politically charged right now. Things are going on in the world scene. And when someone is so charged by that stuff, it's because they do not feel safe. Now, growing up again, what we experienced in childhood, the number one thing that I work on is practicing being safe. And in our imagination, we can close our eyes and practice being safe. And when you practice being safe, you allow those emotions that are unsafe to show up, because you're feeling them as you feel like you're not safe, but you're trying to feel safe. The unpleasant, safe feelings show up and they pass through you. And then you feel safe just while you're quietly in your room listening to music and meditating on safe. Fascinating.
It is. And I don't want to let this go, because I think it's super cool. All right. So if you just meditate and say, I feel safe, I am in a safe space, tomorrow's going to be safe, I have nothing to worry about. By meditating in that way, will the unsafe things show up in your mind so you can identify them?
Well, as soon as you say, I feel safe, your body's going to say, you don't feel safe. And you're going to say, you're right. I don't feel safe, but I want to feel safe. So you allow the I don't feel safe to show up. Remember, the emotion has to pass through you. If you think about a cell, it has the unpleasant energy on the inside of it because it's collected it as it's going along the journey. I mentioned this earlier. When you're born, you have no unpleasant energy inside you. And if we don't learn how to let go of it, next thing you know, we got a whole bunch of it, right, when we're older. And learning how to let go of it is to be with it, to experience it. So I don't feel safe, but I want to. So when you don't feel safe, you just sit and don't feel safe. You got to feel it, right? But when you get done not feeling safe, pretty soon you feel safe. And then you choose to feel safe. However, if you choose to not let the unsafe emotion show up, it's still inside the bucket. No, doesn't work.
It's almost like you need to say something to somebody and you have to coax them to come to your front door so you can open the door and say, hey, you're not going to bother me anymore.
Oh my gosh. I love that analogy. That's exactly what you're doing. You're coaxing that emotion. Now, if you simply say, and I practice this often with clients in my office so that they can figure it out, I'll say things like, just sit there with me and say, I'm sad, Dan. I'm just really sad today, Dan. Once they start saying that, I'm afraid. They feel it. And as soon as that feeling starts showing up, then I'll say, I hate this person. I'm angry at them, because that emotion of hurt and anger is the same place as sad. And they begin to understand how they can let go of it. So you have to get down here. Your emotions pass through your heart. You have to get in this part of you in order to actually feel it. And that's why you have to slow your brain down and be quiet. As we talked about before, in our culture, we overtalk. We talk way too much. Way too much.
So I just want to find out one final thing on what we're talking about. And when you say you declare how you feel, should you say that you do feel safe? Don't say that you don't feel safe to get it. You follow what I'm saying? Like, go on the positive side of things, even if you.
Well, you're talking about affirmations, and there's nothing wrong with affirmations. But I am not talking about affirmations. I'm talking about the fact that you sit quietly and you choose that I want to feel safe. And as soon as you say I want to feel safe, that's not an affirmation. I'm going to feel safe. I'm going to do really well. We're not talking about that. We're talking about quietly sitting with your eyes closed and saying, you know what? I just don't feel safe some days. I feel so sad, but I don't want to feel sad. So I'm sad. So when you say sad, it shows up in your body. Yes. But the emotions only last a short while when you start feeling sad. And after a while, it would kind of go away, like you stub your toe, right? Just a little while. And then after you done saying that, then you go to, but I don't have to be sad. I can be happy. And so then you start thinking about joy and pulling it toward you and what you want like to be in the future. This is all in your imagination. And the reason that you're doing it quietly in your imagination, because everything you do is imaginary. The only thing that's actually not imaginary is the moment. Everything out is imaginary. You're imagining the past and the future. No. So we have to get rid of the energy so that we don't imagine things incorrectly.
That's fascinating. It really is. Now, what about the self-fulfilling prophecy? You say things, whatever it may be, and then they become true. Is that usually what's going to happen?
Well, it's because the energy in it is actually what happens. Remember, your energy inside you is what you attract. It's the energy inside you. And the only way you know what the energy is to notice the words you use. This always happens to me, Steve. Every single time I buy a car, I always get a bad deal. Hello, right? I'm never going to find he's never going to love me. I just hate this always happens to me. I never get deals, right? Well, when you say those words, that means that construct here, every word you say comes from energy inside you. Right? Energy flows up. So when you're saying those words, that's the energy. So if that word shows up in your head, that means that that's the energy that's there. I don't want to, instead of saying, I don't want to say that. No, like it's when I say like, man, that happens to me every single time. Like I took my mower in today because it broke for the 4th time. And I was talking to the guys about it this morning. And I was like, I don't think I should mow this year. Right. But it's not like, oh my gosh, my mower always breaks. It's no like, it's just normal. It's getting old. Right. I don't have this negative feeling about it. The self-fulfilling prophecy isn't there for me. It's just getting old. It's like 17 years old, right? Maybe he said, maybe you need to get a new one. But one of the guys said, well, maybe you shouldn't mow, or you're sure having a lot of trouble with that mower. So
right.
It's not a self-fulfilling prophecy for me, even though maybe those circumstances are speaking that I need to do something different, but I don't have this negative feeling about those things always go wrong. I don't have that because I don't have that negative energy. So as soon as you notice the language that you're saying, that's the energy that you want to go after and rewire that. And the energy comes from the unpleasant thoughts that you have about yourself.
By the way, I have a lawnmower and it's 22 years old and the belt fell off. So and it's not an easy fix, and it happened once before. But it is what it is. It's old. I can tell you from my past experience, saying certain things do come true. And usually I'm talking about negative things, unfortunately, until I learned that you need to put out the positive energy, because those things did come true. And it took years for them to come true. But as I look back, even recently, it's like, I said that, and that's what I was. I mean,
but it doesn't have to take years. That's why you want to close. That's why you want to close your eyes and imagine the truth that you want. For example, I used to say that I was stupid because I have a learning disability. I rewired that, but every time I felt stupid, I'm like, no, I'm not. oh man, I feel so stupid, but I'm not stupid. I rewired that energy by changing it in the moment. In the moment, I corrected the language. I didn't say, no, I'm not going to say that. No, I'm like, yeah, I
Yeah.
just felt that, but I'm not going to think that. So when you wire it directly with it.
Yeah. I was in a relationship and I often, once a year or two, whatever, I just feel like a paycheck here. I just feel like a paycheck. Guess what? That's what I was in the end. And yeah, I don't know if I made that happen, but that's what I was thinking and that's what I felt. I don't know.
Can we go there? So let's let's talk about that energy, what you just said. All right.
Right.
Now that may have affected the person that you're in a relationship with, but that's more about you.
Oh, no,
That's
no.
about your inability. Well, maybe you knew that. That's your inability to connect with who you really are. Your identity was that you didn't know how to engage in that relationship to not feel like that paycheck. Because see, you own how that relationship is going instead of they own it.
Yeah, but how come you say, I don't mean that just that example, but you say you feel a certain way. Is it ever the other person making you feel that way? Or no, can't be. I know what you're asking.
If I don't have a red ball, I don't have a red ball, right? So if I don't have an emotion, then I don't have it on the inside of me. You can only have an emotion that's inside you. No one gives you an emotion. They just expose to what's already inside you.
Okay, so hypothetical. I don't feel respected in this relationship. You just make me feel like CRAP. Somebody says that. Is it all on them, or does the other person have anything to do with that?
It means that in that relationship, you're not getting the things that you need to feel respected, and you haven't learned how to engage with them to help them understand how you want that to go away. Yes, they're doing that, but you would not feel respected in a lot of different relationships or even all over the place, because that's just a feeling that you have all the time. You just attribute it to that also. So no feeling is typically universal or just in one relationship. So that's why you want to work on learning how to see. Again, it gets back to, if you want to not have self-fulfilling prophecy and not feel respected all the time, then you learn how to behave in a way that you are respected, because people reflect back to you who you are.
And I totally get that. And what have you done? All you can do. You feel like you tried in that situation to feel respected, and you don't feel like you're getting it back from that person. Is it always 100% on you?
No, it's great, because you're actually describing, when you start moving toward learning how to always be respectable and feeling like you're always doing the right thing, the energy level in you changes, and that person will eventually just simply start going away. They won't stay. I mean, there's no argument about, you're not respecting me. It's just like very simple. Very, very simple. It's lightweight. I mean, there's no reason to have argument about something, because as you become more healthy, you don't have to demand anything from anyone. You just start living the way that you want to, and they choose to stay or go, or you choose to let go of them. But it just becomes very simple. You just know that it doesn't work. It's never a big deal. If we don't know how to forgive in our current culture or how to repair. And so you can actually leave a relationship and it not be an unforgiving hatred thing. Our culture is broken in that respect. You can leave a relationship and still have the best relationship with the person that you were married to that you've ever had, because you learned how to be who you are and accept them who they are, and not want to hold on to how you got hurt. Oh.
And it's not easy. I agree with you 100%. And that's why even, if whether you're religious or not, somebody says, you know what, just take the high road, pray for them. And that could be put a positive intention, whatever. It doesn't even have to be religious. It's also a form of forgiveness at the same time. But yeah, it's not easy. It's just not easy.
Well, let's go back to being present. When someone is fully present, they're living in a way that nothing really affects them, because they're able to handle whatever comes toward them. When you have no negative energy on the inside of you, you're an amazing person, because you are so kind. It's just natural. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong. Anger is also natural. So it's different kinds of anger. There's good and bad anger. But a person who's present, alive, and doesn't have a lot of old stuff on the inside of them, they flow so well that no matter what's coming toward them, they can handle it. They are really good. Like I can say, no, thank you. And I don't want to do that. And this isn't working for me. And I don't think this is going to be something I want to do right now. I can be very, very kind about where I want to go without being offending, because I don't get hurt very often, unless I'm judgmental, which I'm working on that, as I mentioned earlier. We have those things inside us. By the way, if they're family or a relationship, they can hurt you the most, and because they're the closest to the brain development of 0 to 4.
So you're saying that your family can hurt you the most because they're the closest to the brain development?
Yeah, so you can't judge personal development on family because family can hurt you a lot because of where they're at in brain development. And it's really hard to move away from some of that stuff. It's a lot easier to be kinder to people who are strangers or people you
Yes.
work with than someone you're in a relationship with.
Totally get that. Yeah.
But
So I want to throw something out based on what you're saying because I'm fascinated by it. How we cause the situations in relationships, but we think it's the other person, right? I know you do a lot of couples counseling and individual counseling for couples as well. By the way, we're talking to Dan Clark, and he's a life coach. You can find him at transformedlife.net. What if you have two people and this person breached the trust in the relationship? Does that reflect on the other person at all if they did whatever they did?
Well, since relationships are 50% me and 50% you, if they breach the relationship, then there was a communication break somewhere along the road. Somebody wasn't being truthful early on. It doesn't just happen because they're a bad person. No, no one goes into a relationship. I mean, that's rarely it does happen, but for the most part, it's because something happened along the way that the person that broke the trust wasn't getting their needs met, and they're responsible for asking to get those needs met.
And if they asked, they didn't get their needs yet, and they took it upon themselves and they breached the trust, then it's still a 50-50 deal?
Well, it is because when trust gets broken, like there's an affair, something like that happens in a relationship, it's never the affair that ends the relationship. It's all the things that didn't happen up until that point. So affairs never really end the relationship. It's understanding what wasn't happening, because when the person is breaking trust, typically it's because the person they're in a relationship with won't hear them. And they're finally just done with that person. They just like looking for something out here to make them feel good because the person that hearing them that they're with doesn't really understand them. Another way to think about it is this, is that in a relationship, we think that the person leaving is the bad one. When in reality, the person that's leaving is typically the good one. The one that's behind just doesn't get it. And they're just, the person that's leaving is done. This relationship isn't working for me.
Interesting. Wow. We dug in deep today and very interesting.
Yeah, and in relationship pieces of that, because of engagement, as I was talking about earlier, and we don't have a lot of time to get into that, engagement means that I am totally with you. Now, for example, you and I are flowing in an engagement that's a high level because we're flowing with, you're asking great questions, we're flowing with the conversation, we're connecting, there's nothing really that's interrupting our thought process. We don't have any energy between us from the past. If there was energy in the past or something that we hadn't solved yet, that's called unspoken words, unsolved conflict. The reason that relationships break down and engagement and relations don't work is because we haven't said something that needs to be said in the relationship, because any words that are unsaid create all of the difficulties in the relationship. So you teach them transparency, but how to talk about what's actually happening without asking the other person to change.
But if you don't communicate that clearly, wouldn't it clearly be your issue in the relationship?
Yeah, it's like dishes never get done or dishes always get done. Like, I'm gonna leave you if you don't ever start doing the dishes. Well, that's kind of silly, right? So sometimes we get in this place where I just can't stand it because she doesn't do the dishes good enough. Well, that's really silly. That's because that's learned, right? We learned how to do dishes growing up. But in the big picture, it's the things that happen that are super small, like I don't feel respected or honored or cared for or loved.
Yep.
And we don't express that.
Yeah. Wow. I can't believe we're out of time already. Fascinating. And I'm glad we took the shovel and went deep on this one, because it is, as we said along the way, and then even since we have talked, I've been hearing it more and more, and I guess I'm more plugged into it about the 0 to 7, your life shaping your future, and then also 7 to 14, just another aspect of that.
Oh my gosh, there's so many development stages there, but learning them and paying attention to them is just a great thing. I would encourage everyone to get into either a therapy or a life coach situation. Now, I work on the core. If someone has a life coach and they're working on their business process or how to develop their business, that's a different type of coaching. I do relationship and emotional coaching, which is a very deep, changing who you are, becoming the kind of person that you desire to be.
Yes, but also you need to start there before you can improve your work situation and your professional life.
I can promise you, if you're not successful in business because you have habits, this kind of relationships coaching can help you. I promise. It'll change everything about you.
Yeah, transformedlife.net. There's no other life coach anywhere on the planet that centers on emotions, and that's where we all center from, whether we realize it or not. And I hope people realize it based on what we've been talking about.
Well, I certainly enjoyed this today, Steve, very, very much.
Definitely, Dan. I appreciate it and look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you can now listen live on the MyTuner Radio and online Radio Box apps for iOS, Android, and the Amazon App Store. Or check us out online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com or search Podcast Business News Network on onlineradiobox.com/US so you don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.